Sorry to logged in now. I had some connecting. I was on the car.
Oh, okay.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
We would like to start the session for the afternoon. So good afternoon to all the delegates of the conference. You have logged into the National E-Conference on Labor and Birth organized by the Department of OBG, KVG Medical College and Hospital, Sulia. So far, we have had an explicit sequence of talks by our esteemed speakers, and I'm sure everyone is feeling very enlightened by now. So moving forward to the third session of today's conference, our next speaker is Dr. Parag Biniwale, Honorary Secretary, ICOG. Sir has guided us through this conference and enabled us to get 10 ICOG credit points for this conference. Thank you so much, sir.
Welcome.
Chairing this session is Dr. Prasanna Shetty, Professor, Department of K.S. Hegde Institute of Medical Sciences, IVF Specialist and President of Mangalore Obstetrics and Gynecology Society. The coordinator for this session will be Dr. Ravikant Gio, Associate Professor, Organizing Secretary of this conference, and Associate Professor of Department of OBG, KVG Medical College and Hospital. So I kindly request Dr. Prasanna sir to introduce our speaker and to take over this session, sir. Over to you, sir, Prasanna sir.
Thank you, one and all. And I thank especially the organizing team of KVG Medical College, Sulia, for very well organized and executed. And also special thanks to Dr. Geeta ma'am and Dr. Ravikant for having me here as a chairperson. Today we have in our midst Dr. Parag Biniwale, who is a senior consultant of obstetrics and gynecology from Pune. He's a very well-known speaker. Many of you would have already heard him give several lectures on various topics, and is a most sought-after speaker all over India. He's a unit head and PG teacher, Kamala Nehru Hospital, secretary of ICOG between 2018 and 20, that is for the current tenure. He's also the president of Menopause Society Pune, National Joint Secretary, IMS 1718, National Website Editor, Foxy 2011-17, peer reviewer for Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology, India between 12 and 17, Chairman Young Talent Promotion Committee, Foxy 2006 and 10, and Master Trainer for Adolescent-Friendly Health Services, conducted workshops for WHO, UNFPA, GOI, Foxy, etc.
I will throw your bloody German cop past.
And co-editor, Gynecological Manual of Adolescent Girl and Young Women, Yearbook of Obstetrics and Gynecology. And he has several publications to his credit, and is a recipient of Dr. C.S. Don Prize, 51st All India Congress of Obstetrics and Gynecology, New Delhi, resume. And I'm sure he will talk. And we all are going to have an academic feast. Over to you, Dr. Parag Biniwale, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Prasanna. Can I share my screen, please?
Yes, sir, you can share, sir. Now.
Yeah. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I bring greetings from ICOG, the Indian College of OBGYN, which is the academic wing of Foxy. And it's a pleasure to be part of today's conference. I'm happy to say that the conference organized by Team Sulia has been accredited by ICOG by giving 10 credit points. And these points are important, especially for those practitioners who do not have publications and who are interested in joining ICOG as fellow. At the outset, I would like to thank Geeta, Ravikant, and the entire team for having me here. And I must thank them specifically because they allowed me to change my timing, which was clashing with the ICOG Governing Council meeting. In next 20 minutes, I'm going to talk about something which is close to the heart of each and every obstetrician. And I'm a proud hardcore obstetrician. That's what I always say. I do not have any conflict of interest for this particular lecture, and this is the these are the lines on which the lecture will be taken. Introduction, inductions, we'll talk about contraindications. We'll also discuss methods of induction of labor, talk a little bit about prostaglandins because they have a very important role to play as far as induction of labor is concerned. And then we will also talk about protocols for induction of labor. So all of us know that induction of labor means initiation of uterine contractions by any method. So it could be a medical method, it could be a surgical method, it could be a combination of those, and it is initiated with the one purpose of achieving a vaginal delivery. We may or may not be successful in achieving vaginal delivery, but that is what that is what the aim of this procedure is. We know that induction of labor once upon a time was difficult and it was not in vogue. I belong to an era where we did not have prostaglandins when I was doing my PG in the early 90s, and only it was year 1994 when we got the prostaglandins available in our armamentarium. So for someone like me, induction of labor was, those rare situations where we used to do only sweeping of membranes, wait for the patient to go in labor on her own, or we used to give oxytocin drips for days together to ripen the cervix and try and achieve induction of labor. But nowadays, this is becoming more popular, and almost 15 to 20% pregnant women choose to have labor induced in one or more pregnancies. And we know that women with a cervical score of more than 5, the labor is generally easy than women who have a poor Bishop's. It is one of the most commonly performed obstetrical procedures, and in between 1990 and 2006, the frequency of labor induction approximately has doubled from 9.5% to 22.5%, and the reasons could be variable. One of the most important part being availability of prostaglandin. In the US, the annual incidence of labor induction or augmentation was about 20% in 1980s. It rose to about 38%. So almost doubling was also noted here. But we must remember one very important fact, that induction of labor is associated with increased complications as compared to spontaneous labors. So coming to the indications, what all are the clinical situations where we would like to terminate a pregnancy? First and foremost, one of the common conditions in our country, preeclampsia, eclampsia, which still causes a lot of morbidity and mortality in our women. Pre-labor rupture of membranes is something where we have to take appropriate decision to induce labor depending on the clinical situation. So we do expect the labor to initiate on its own within 12 to 24 hours, but if it doesn't, probably induction of labor has some role to play. Postpartum pregnancy, though the Western literature says one can wait very safely up to 42 weeks, I'm sure none of us here in our country are waiting beyond 40 or 41 weeks. Abruption of placenta, chorioamnionitis, and medical conditions like diabetes mellitus, chronic hypertension, etc., do warrant induction of labor. There are some fetal conditions where induction of labor might be indicated. First and foremost is the unfortunate scenario of intrauterine fetal demise, where you as obstetrician and the patient also want the baby to be delivered as early as possible in order to prevent psychological as well as physical trauma. Fetal anomalies incompatible with life. Unfortunately, there are some women where fetal anomalies are diagnosed at a very late stage. For example, diagnosis of something like anencephaly done at 28 or 30 weeks. So you are in a soup how to deal with this, but this does become indication for induction of labor. Severe fetal growth restriction. Again, it's important that you assess the situation, and if you feel that the baby would be better off being delivered, then induction of labor is definitely an important aspect. So is an important aspect as far as Rh isoimmunization is concerned. There are some indications which are called high priority indications. sorry, preeclampsia more than 37 weeks. In fact, if the hypertension is uncontrolled, or if we are dealing with a woman who has severe hypertension, one can think of delivering her anytime during the course of pregnancy. So may it be 32, 34, or even 37 weeks. Significant maternal diseases not responding to treatment, antepartum hemorrhage, suspected fetal compromise, and term pre-labor rupture of membranes with maternal GBS colonization. There are some other indications where one can definitely think of delivering the baby, which would include diabetes, uncomplicated twin pregnancy more than 38 weeks, and even oligoamnios and growth restriction where the fetal health may be compromised. There are some indications which are unacceptable, but they do occur in our country. Care provider or patient convenience delivering on an auspicious day at an auspicious time still has some women opting for induction of labor. Suspected fetal macrosomia, that is estimated fetal weight more than 4,000 grams in a non-diabetic woman, is an unacceptable indication because there is definitely no reduction of incidence of shoulder dystocia, but twice the risk of cesarean section. There are some situations where induction of labor should be avoided because there could be contraindications for labor or even vaginal birth. So placenta previa or vasa previa, abnormal fetal lie, prior classical or inverted T cesarean section, significant prior uterine surgery, for example, a full thickness myomectomy where vaginal delivery may not be the right option, or active genital herpes, pelvic structural deformities, or previous history of uterine rupture. When we talk about induction of labor, we also should know that we are posing certain risks to the woman. And the first and foremost being failure to achieve labor in spite of repeated efforts of using different methods for induction of labor. One may not be able to achieve initiation of labor, and that could land up in an unwarranted cesarean section. Operative vaginal deliveries are definitely found to be more. Some women do experience some amount of tachysystole, especially so with prostaglandins, and that too with misoprostol. It could be with or without fetal heart changes. Chorioamnionitis, yes, if you've done rupture of membranes earlier, and if the label gets prolonged, you're making the woman more prone for chorioamnionitis. When we are thinking of artificial rupture of membranes to initiate labor, we have to think about cord prolapse. And let's not forget the inadvertent delivery of a preterm infant, especially if there is some issue with the dates, or if the dates and the ultrasound reports are not matching. In a rare situation, one may experience uterine rupture, may it be an unscarred uterus. So SOGC has given certain recommendations, and we should think of these recommendations. First of all, the indication for induction must be documented. We are living in an era of medical legality, so we should discuss everything with the patient and the relatives. So when we are discussing, we should discuss why you are thinking of inducing the labor, the method of induction. Maybe you can discuss about options, the risks which are associated with induction of labor, which definitely includes failure to achieve labor and possible increased risk of cesarean section. If the induction of labor is unsuccessful, the indication and the method of induction should be re-evaluated. Induction should not be performed solely for suspected fetal macrosomia, and induction should not be performed solely because of patient or healthcare provider preference. We all know about the Bishop score, and probably this is the first thing a junior houseman learns when he or she enters the department of OBGYN, and we know how to do it. So we look for cervical dilatation, consistency of the cervix, length of the cervical canal, that is position of the cervix, and station of the presenting part. And if we give scores of 0, 1, 2, and 3, and then it is noted that if the cervical score is favorable, vaginal delivery is definitely possible. If the cervix is unfavorable, that is, if the score is low, induction definitely takes longer period and it is more likely to fail and may end up in a cesarean section. Going ahead with the recommendations, healthcare providers should assess the cervix, that is using Bishop score, to determine the likelihood of success and to select appropriate method of induction. So it is important that we assess the patient, look at the cervical character, and then choose the right method for that particular patient. And it is important that we note the Bishop score when we initiate the process of induction of labor. Care providers need to consider that induction of woman with an unfavorable cervix is associated with higher failure rate, especially in nulliparous patient, and a higher cesarean section rate in nulliparous and even parous patients. So this is something we have to keep in mind, and we have to counsel women on this aspect also. Can we prevent induction of labor? One thing which we can think about is a routine antenatal ultrasound for confirmation of expected date of delivery has shown to reduce induction rate for post-date pregnancies after correction of date. So if the patient is sure of her dates, we can definitely rely on her dates. And nowadays, when we offer NT scan to all the women between 12 to 13 weeks, it is supposed to be the accurate, and especially so in women who have irregular periods or delayed conceptions, and one can think of adjusting the due date for that particular patient. There is evidence that routine sweeping or stripping of membranes promotes the onset of labor, and this simple technique decreases induction rates. So it is believed that this technique results into an increased production, local production of prostaglandins, helps the cervix to ripen, and when you actually induce these women, the results are likely to be better. Now, every woman should ideally have an ultrasound, preferably in the first trimester, to confirm gestational age. Yes, it is possible in a woman who has an access to ultrasound in all trimesters, but in a remote situation or a remote place where ultrasound facilities may not be available, this looks a difficult position. An institution should have quality assurance program and induction policies, including safety tools such as checklists to ensure the inductions are performed only for acceptable indications. Moving ahead with recommendations, women should be offered induction of labor between 41 and 42 weeks, as this intervention may reduce perinatal mortality and meconium aspiration syndrome without increasing the C-section rate. I did mention earlier that this definitely holds true in the Western literature. The RCOG, the SOGC do recommend continuation of pregnancy, waiting till about 42 weeks, but I'm sure, and I would certainly like to note comments of teachers here sitting here in the audience about their views also. And women who choose to delay induction beyond 41 weeks should undergo twice weekly assessment of fetal well-being. So preferably electronic monitoring is something that is recommended. So where the facilities may not be available, one can think of inducing labor even in such a patient. Coming to induction of labor in advanced maternal age that is 35 years or older. There was a time when we used to consider any woman more than 30 to be of advanced maternal age, but now it is 35. It now accounts for a high number of pregnancies and live births, and given the increased risk of stillbirth in women with advanced maternal age, some experts suggest women who are more than 40 years of age to consider biologically postpartum at 39 weeks of gestation, and the delivery should be considered at this gestation. Of course, this is a debatable point, but one has to think of monitoring the mother and the fetus rather closely before taking any such call. A big chunk of pregnancies nowadays is pregnancies after ART, and there was a time when we used to offer elective cesarean section for all women who've undergone ART procedures. This is no more true. Nowadays, induction of labor can definitely be considered depending on the individual basis. There are so many factors which would determine how the mode of delivery and how whether you're going to induce the labor or not, which includes maternal general condition and of course condition of the fetus and NICU care. Okay. Before actually talking about methods of induction, there are some options which are traditionally described in the literature, like walking, sexual intercourse, nipple stimulation. All these are supposed to increase prostaglandins. Castor oil is something which we also use sometimes, especially in a second gravida with a good Bishop score and where you want to induce labor. Castor oil definitely works, though the literature does not support it. Enema was a routine practice before induction of labor. In fact, repeated enemas were also considered in some studies, but that's a debatable point. The next option we know is the artificial rupture of membranes. One can think of rupturing the membranes by using Ellis forceps or finger, or even there's a certain hook which comes nowadays for rupture of membranes. Balloon catheter is something which has been used, and I must mention the name of Professor Piley, who does use this particular method with excellent results of achieving vaginal deliveries. And prostaglandin is something which all of us know. Of course, there were hygroscopic dilators, etc., available which were used for induction of labor. But what is important is counseling. So one has to counsel the patient and her relatives about why induction is necessary, how is it carried out, drugs and methods. We know that induced labors are more painful, so we have to talk about options of pain relief, what to expect during the course of labor, so how the reassessment will be done and how the further course of action will be taken, what problems can occur. And one very important line which I believe is induction of labor does not guarantee a vaginal delivery. It is an attempt to achieve vaginal delivery. Coming to prostaglandins, so when we talk about prostaglandins, it is PGE1 or PGE2. Prostaglandin E2, that is dinoprostone, is available in 4 different preparations. It comes as a controlled release 10 milligram gel, intravaginal 1 milligram and 2 milligram gel, intracervical gel, and PG2 tablets, which are nowadays not available. How do you select the patient for use of prostaglandins? Patient should be afebrile. There should not be any active vaginal bleeding. Fetal heart rate tracing has to be reassuring. Informed consent is to be taken. And this is really important because if the Bishop score is poor, prostaglandins are more likely to produce cervical ripening and better outcomes. After inserting the gel, we have to monitor fetal heart rate and uterine artery continuously, starting 15 to 30 minutes before gel introduction. And it should continue for at least 30 minutes. Some people recommend it up to 120 minutes after gel insertion, and that is because of the possibility of tachysystole. After application of gel, the patient should remain recumbent for 30 minutes before being allowed to ambulate. One can repeat gel every 6 hours. I personally do not use it, and 3 doses can be offered to a woman within 24 hours. Endpoint for ripening includes strong uterine contraction, a Bishop score of 8, or a change in maternal and fetal status. Maximum recommended dosage is 1.5 milligrams of dinoprostone gel in 24 hours, but it is prudent not to start oxytocin for 6 to 12 hours after placement of last dose of prostaglandins. Prostaglandin E2 paste insert, which is an expensive option but works definitely well. This is how one can introduce it. You have to be very particular about the position and the introduction, because when you introduce it it is shown in the picture, it remains in the vaginal fornix in situ for a longer time. Please note that after you insert PGE2, after we introduce PGE2 insert, it has to be kept in place till the woman goes in active labor. And if there is no activity, one can certainly wait for up to 24 hours. We should not hurry up augmenting labor in such women. artificial rupture of membranes is something which has been which is done for a very long time. It has very important role to play in augmentation of labor, but in olden times, artificial rupture of membranes was an important aspect of induction of labor. Of course, it gives you a clue about the liquor, especially in high-risk women, whether the liquor is meconium stained or blood stained, which helps you taking the right decision for that right particular patient. It is extremely important that after induction of labor, we monitor the patients well, and partographic monitoring is something which is so important. So documentation of labor in this sheet is very, very important. It gives you exact information about the patient, about her vitals, about the contractions, about the fetal status, and also about the progress of labor, and you can plan appropriate intervention as and when required. Coming to the protocols, and this is how one has to monitor and do induction of labor. So once you are sure about the induction, we must first rule out contraindication, communicate with the patient and the relatives, try doing sweeping of membranes, which is ideally to be done antenatally, and it should be offered prior to induction of labor. It is important that we do a pre-induction assessment by reviewing history, confirming gestation, by proper examination where we palpate the abdomen for presentation, attitude, position, engagement, etc. CTG should be done in high-risk patients, and a vaginal examination should be done to assess the Bishop score, and sometimes to assess the membranes also. So if the membranes are ruptured, we manage it differently, and right. So if the membranes are intact, and if the Bishop score is more than 7, this is how you monitor. One can think of starting an oxytocin drip, but if the cervix is not favorable, in a case of previous cesarean section, one can think of a balloon catheter. Literature does mention about dinoprostone, but here a word of caution. In a case of previous cesarean section, prostaglandin E2 definitely has higher risks of uterine rupture, which is supposed to be to the tune of 25 per 1,000 cases. After we discuss about the induction, we decide what method one wants to do. So we can think of using a gel, or we can think of using a pessary, which is a 10 milligram pessary, which is placed transversely in the posterior fornix, and we must wait at least for 12 hours. And we say that the induction has failed after 24 hours in this particular case. And then we recommend ARM irrespective of the Bishop score. The monitoring, of course, continues, and then 6 hours after gel, or we can consider starting oxytocin if the labor has not set in. Just a word about induction of labor in COVID times, because all of us are challenged because of this COVID situation, but COVID is not an indication for induction of labor. Monitoring of labor in a patient who is COVID positive is very, very important, but we must remember to avoid prolonged labor, because prolongation of labor is definitely going to cause more aerosol generation, and which would pose healthcare providers at risk. And it is noted that higher incidence of cesarean sections are seen in women who are diagnosed to be COVID positive. So I would like to conclude by summarizing my presentation. So practitioners need to apply clinical judgment and evidence-based medicine to justify that induction of labor is superior to continuation of pregnancy. So careful assessment of the maternal and the fetal status is extremely important. The benefit of induction over continuation of pregnancy is not always clear, but the clinician has some tools to evaluate the likelihood of a successful vaginal delivery, and the clinician should consider all the tools available to optimize a safe process towards achieving a successful vaginal delivery. But we must counsel the patient that induction of labor is an attempt to deliver a patient vaginally, and it is not a guarantee that you are offering. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Parag Biniwale, sir, for that comprehensive and elaborate exposition on induction of labor. And I'm sure all the attendees and postgraduates or and young obstetricians take home the message that induction of labor need to be treated with the utmost seriousness that it deserves, and that no induction patient should be left unmonitored, and what are the latest guidelines and how to go about it in the current pandemic situation also. Thank you so much for that excellent presentation, sir. Dr. Ravi, are there any Q&A sessions, or are we?
If any questions are, you can ask, sir. Sir, here a few questions are there. Parag, sir?
Yeah, are
Yeah,
there any
Ravikant.
questions? Yeah.
Yeah. So in a preterm labor or in IUGR, so how to decide in the induction of labor? Is there any criteria?
Okay. See, when you decide about induction of labor in any patient, I did mention that we have to assess the patient thoroughly. Now, especially in cases of fetal growth restriction, when you find out that delivering a fetus is beneficial for the health of the fetus, we will definitely assess the assess the bishops, assess the pelvis, the adequacy of it, and then take a call about induction of labor. If the cervix is not favorable, and if there is fetal jeopardy, or if the baby is in distress, one definitely can think of performing a cesarean section. But in such a patient, induction of labor is definitely justified. So is true in women who have preterm labor. When I say preterm labor, it is about preterm PROM, that is premature rupture of membranes before term. And these are the patients, especially after say 34 weeks, where after administering steroid, one has to think of terminating the pregnancy. And then this also, so there was a time when we never used to use prostaglandin gel for women with PROM, but again, that's no more true. We can certainly use prostaglandin gel, and prostaglandin insert is also something which can definitely be used, especially in preterm cervixes, or if the cervical character is really poor, if the bishops is poor, then the insert would work better. And we are able to achieve vaginal birth in many cases, actually.
Thank you, sir. So definitely in Indian setup, we don't wait more than 40 weeks for induction of labor, is it not? But nowadays, many studies are encouraging the chances of successful induction of labor is around 39 weeks. So what do you think about that, sir? Like, should we wait till 40 weeks, or should we go for induction at 39 weeks itself?
Ravikant, this will be guided by the patient's clinical condition. Now, if the patient is has a risk factor, say like hypertension or diabetes, then depending on the fetal and maternal condition, you will decide. But for a low risk patient, if the cervix is not favorable, I would certainly like to wait at least till the due date and see if the patient goes in labor or not. Because see, when we try and induce labor before the due date, even if the evidence that you're quoting says so, and if the patient lands up in cesarean section, then the question that is raised is, was it really required? So we have to weigh pros and cons, and then decide about induction of labor.
There's one more question, sir. Like, how to choose the prostaglandins itself? Like, prostaglandins is the induction of labor for when a Bishop score is less than 7.
Right.
So which prostaglandins is preferred? Is there any criteria, sir?
Okay. Now, see, first of all, I have not used prostaglandin even, that is misoprostol, much. Earlier we did use it, but then it was the dose that was available was 200, and it used to cause hyperstimulation. I'm sure all of us have faced that challenge of hyperstimulation, fetal distress, even rupture uterus. But personally, I do not use it in any of my patients. But depending on the cervical character, we have to take a call. PGE2 insert is an expensive option. It costs about 2,500 to 3,000 rupees. So if there's a cost constraint, one can definitely think of PGE2 gel. But if you compare the gel efficacy of the gel and the insert definitely scores, because firstly it has more dose of prostaglandins and the technology with which the drug is released is much slower, so chances of tachysystole or hyperstimulation are much less but then it comes with a cost. It is expensive. So 300 versus 3,000, that is what one has to think of.
Sir, one more question is there, sir. They're asking induction of labor in GDM or overt diabetes mellitus.
Okay. Now GDM, if you read guidelines, they will guide you differently. So when you are reading different guidelines, then they are so confusing. But then again, one has to think that depending on the clinical situation, usually we prefer that if the patient is diagnosed to be GDM and controlled on diet and medical nutrition therapy, one can think of continue vigilant monitoring and deliver her at between 39 to 40 weeks. But GDM who's on metformin, 38 weeks, I think is the cutoff. If the patient has over diabetes or GDM, which is controlled only on insulin, the pregnancy may have to be terminated anytime during the course of pregnancy. So it could be 36, it could be 37, depending on the maternal and the fetal status.
One more question is there, sir. How many times can the PGE2 gel be repeated, and when to call it the failure of induction of labor?
Okay. Now, as far as PGE2 gel is concerned, there are studies where PGE2 gel was used every 6 hours, and 3 applications in 24 hours is something which is recommended in the literature. I personally do not use more than once. If at all I have to repeat it, I will repeat the second gel after 24 hours. But then in spite of 2 or 3 applications, if there's hardly any change in the cervical character, if the Bishop's is more or less the same, we can say that the cervix is not responding. Of course, one has to take a call on the maternal as well as fetal condition, how soon the labor has to be terminated. So decision of C-section or attempting augmentation of labor has to be only based on the clinical monitoring.
Many more questions are coming, sir. One more question. Can combination of dinoprostol gel and misoprostol be used?
I have never used it. I would certainly refrain from using 2 prostaglandins at a time or even one after the other, right? So please remember that prostaglandins are mainly used for ripening of the cervix, and we have a wonder drug called oxytocin in our kitty, which can be used very safely in most of the women for augmentation of labor. So I would definitely not use PGE2 and PGE1 in the same patient.
Prasanna sir, any more questions are there?
Only thing, one of the things which used to be in vogue a couple of decades ago was programmed labor.
Yeah.
So what is your opinion on programmed labor, Dr. Parag?
Programmed labor is something which is described by Dr. Daftari, who's a big name or a great teacher from Wadia Maternity Hospital. Somehow we've not used programmed labor in our practice, though sir has used it, and there are a lot of people who are following it, and they do find more chances of vaginal deliveries in case of programmed labor. So it's a combination of induction, augmentation, and good analgesia in order to achieve a vaginal birth. But in our setups, we are not using it. Our patients are more demanding epidural analgesias as a part of pain relief. But sir has used it for years together, and there are so many people who are using it with excellent results.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so one more question is there. What is your experience on Folis induction and mifepristone use?
Mifepristone, we've not used it in any full-term patient, But in cases of intrauterine fetal demise, we have used mifepristone. I mean, what we are doing it is we are administering mifepristone, calling the patient the next day. Then what we do is we insert a number 18 Foleys, inflate the balloon with 50 cc normal saline, leave it in place, and next morning, that is 48 hours after mifepristone, if the patient has not gone in labor, we administer misoprostol. This is how we've been monitoring intrauterine fetal demise cases. I did mention about Dr. Piley, who has used Foley's catheter a lot for ripening of cervix. He has even used it in a lot of cases of previous cesarean section where they were attempting a VBAC, and he has quoted excellent results in practice.
What is the how careful we should be there in a previous LSCS Foley's catheter induction, sir?
In a case of previous LSCS, I think induction by Foley's catheter should not be a big challenge because we don't expect it to cause any harm to the previous scar anyway, right? So in fact, if it works, we can certainly avoid using prostaglandins in such patients.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your lucid discussion. And it was very nice having you here.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Prasanna, sir. Thank you for your...
You're most welcome. Thank you for having me, Ravi.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Parag Biniwale. And thank you, Dr. Prasanna Shetty, for chairing the session. And I would also like to thank our coordinator, Dr. Ravikant Jio. We break for tea now until 2:45. And at sharp 2:45, we'll be starting the free scientific e-paper and poster presentations. All participants have been sent their respective links and time slots. And I request you to please follow the rules for a smooth session. So here we come to the end of today's talks and all three sessions. But before I sign off for today, I would like to remind you that we have to meet again tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp, and the talks will start at 9 a.m. sharp. So another day with another lineup of amazing speakers. Until then, take care, stay safe, and good night.